Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre roasted Laurentian elites this weekend and said the recently resigned cabinet minister Steven Guilbeault fits in with the NDP's brand of crazy next to the, quote, furries and queers for Palestine.
Following the resignation of Steven Guilbeault last week, Marc Miller has been appointed to Prime Minister Mark Carney's cabinet to assume the role of Canadian Culture Minister.
A new poll finds that lacking a family doctor could mean Canadians are more than twice as likely to struggle accessing the rest of Canada's healthcare system, including early screening for cancer. Hello, Canada. It's Tuesday, December 2nd, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Geoff Knight.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre roasted several politicians and members of the media during the annual Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner over the weekend, taking shots at Prime Minister Mark Carney, former Environment Minister Steven Guilbeault, and Green Party leader Elizabeth May. Comedian Chris Wilson was giving a speech impersonating Poilievre during the dinner on Saturday night, as he routinely does on CBC's This Hour Has 22 Minutes. Over the weekend, Wilson roasted the Conservative leader on losing his seat, cabinet turmoil, his new riding, and being disliked by the media. Poilievre then crashed the performance to give a roast of his own, with Wilson handing him an apple before exiting the stage, as a nod to Poilievre's now infamous encounter with a journalist at a British Columbia apple farm. Poilievre opened with a joke calling Wilson the, quote, Timu version of me, while saying that he was also the most expensive comedian at the CBC and the most expensive on a, quote, cost per laugh basis. He then touched on former Environment Minister Steven Guilbeault, who resigned from his role as Canadian Identity and Culture Minister last week after Ottawa and Alberta signed a memorandum of understanding aimed at advancing major infrastructure projects, including a potential pipeline to the West Coast.
The whole thing has us all thinking about caucus management. I think that Steven Guilbeault would actually agree that this is very important. I hear that the NDP actually rejected having Guilbeault join their caucus. What an ego blow. Come on, Don. Is Don Davies here tonight? Don, come on, man. Beggars can't be choosers. And surely Steven Guilbeault's brand of crazy would fit in right between the delegation of furries and the Queers for Palestine.
The Conservative leader then took aim at the CBC and the Prime Minister, saying that if he defunded the state broadcaster, they could always move their, quote, head office to a Caribbean tax haven so that Brookfield could pay for it. Poilievre added that another method the CBC could use to fund itself outside of taxpayers would be for CBC anchor David Cochrane to, quote, start charging for the water he carries for the Liberal Party. So, Geoff, this seems to be in good humor. Poilievre was in good spirits when he did this. Obviously, there's some playful jabbing on both parts. What other jokes did Poilievre say during this appearance that stood out?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. There was a few standout jokes from Poilievre that really kind of got me cracking up. When he called Wilson the Timu version of himself, the most expensive comedian on a cost per laugh basis. But my favorite was when he was going after Elizabeth May, and he referenced Carney's disastrous appearance at the Grey Cup and said that he got more booze than Elizabeth May's liquor cabinet. He got her again when he said that she's so eco-focused that even her liquor cabinet runs on solar power. It's like a running theme with Elizabeth May here, I think. He also went after Steven Guilbeault's resignation, quipping that Guilbeault finally found a job where he could hug a tree without getting arrested. And of course, many of you will remember how Guilbeault got arrested trying to climb the CN Tower for, I believe it was for Greenpeace. For the CBC closer, he suggested that if he defunded the CBC, they could relocate the head office to a Caribbean tax haven so Brookfield could foot the bill. It kind of reminded me of Ricky Gervais' famous opening monologue at the 2020 Golden Globes. And according to commenters on X, Pierre's stand-up was way funnier than the Wilson routine. Prime Minister Mark Carney has shuffled his cabinet in the wake of Steven Guilbeault's resignation from his portfolio, with the Prime Minister appointing Montreal MP Marc Miller as the new Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture. The swearing-in took place on Monday at Rideau Hall, with Governor-General Mary Simon presiding. Miller's return to the cabinet marks a notable reversal for the Carney government. A longtime ally of former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Miller previously held several senior posts, including immigration, Crown Indigenous Relations, and Indigenous Services, before being removed from cabinet earlier this year when Carney took office. His reinstatement restores him to a cabinet role that oversees the Liberal government's Online Streaming Act, which has been dubbed censorious by civil liberties groups. At a late October meeting of the Justice Committee, Miller argued that the Bible includes hateful passages that should be prosecuted when deciding how to deal with hate crimes. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre attacked Miller in response to the news of a Liberal bloc deal, removing religious exemptions from the government's Combating Hate Act, Bill C-9. Carney also reassigned Public Works and Procurement Minister Joel Lightbound, naming him Minister of Government Transformation, Public Works, and Procurement, and elevating him to Quebec Lieutenant. Lightbound, first elected in 2015, received his first cabinet role only after April's election, but will now serve as the Prime Minister's senior political representative in the province. Environment and Climate Change Minister Julie de Brusen's title has been expanded to include responsibility for nature, reflecting a consolidation of federal conservation files. So, Cosmin, what does this cabinet shuffle tell us about the state of the Liberal Party right now?
Yeah, Geoff, I think it would be a good time to go into a little bit of a recap of Mark Carney's cabinet, because we have to remember he's only been in office since March. And from day one, he sort of signaled this idea that he wanted a very different looking team. His first cabinet was unveiled back in March, and this is before the election, when he was after he became Liberal leader and essentially took over former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's role. And they made a big show about this as being like a dramatic reset, a leaner group of just 23 cabinet ministers, cutting quite a few. It was a substantial downsizing, and at the same time, he brought in quite a few loyalists to Trudeau. So you saw Francois-Philippe Champagne come back. He remains in Carney's cabinet. And importantly, right, we saw Steven Guilbeault hold over from the Trudeau cabinet, where he took on his role as Culture and Identity Minister. And then comes the election, so the Liberals scrape by with their minority, and Carney actually expands his cabinet by a few positions. He actually got a lot of blowback during his initial cabinet choices, one of them being because he removed the Minister of Women entirely. But he reintroduces that and also expands his cabinet a little bit and introduces 10 secretaries of state, bringing in quite a few rookies, mind you. Additionally, he moves Anita Anand to Foreign Affairs, David McGuinty to Defense, Sean Fraser also gets shifted, and then there's a new AI minister with Evan Solomon. But here we are now with a mini shuffle. It's not a huge cabinet overhaul, which indicates that he's actually trying to continue with the same team he's assembled to some degree. But he brings in Marc Miller to replace Guilbeault. Now, to me, that's actually an indication of closer ties to his predecessor, given the fact that Marc Miller was actually an attendee at Justin Trudeau's wedding. If I'm not mistaken, I think he was actually one of the groomsmen at the wedding. There's pictures of him holding Justin Trudeau, and they're all together. So it tells us two things. First, Carney is able to patch holes pretty quickly. I mean, Guilbeault has been a holdout from the Trudeau era, and now he's gone. But he brings back in Miller, who I would say is actually a much better representative of the Trudeau era than Guilbeault, in the sense that he was way closer to Trudeau than Guilbeault was. Guilbeault was more of a ideological fellow traveler. And additionally, Miller knows the cultural and language file pretty well. He once served as the immigration minister, and he's got a lot of background and sway within the Liberal Party. But additionally, it also shows how reactive Carney has been, and he's had to have been on his feet this whole time because of the constantly shifting internal dynamics within his party. A new poll reveals a stark reality that 1 in 5 Canadians lack a family doctor, making them more than twice as likely to struggle with early cancer screenings and non-emergency medical care. A new survey from the Angus Reid Institute, conducted in partnership with the Canadian Cancer Society, found that 19% of Canadians do not have a family doctor, and another 30% have a doctor but find it difficult to get an appointment. The study also found that a lack of access to a family doctor has a rippling effect on access to other parts of Canada's healthcare system. More than a quarter of Canadians, 26%, report chronic difficulty accessing healthcare, while a third of respondents said they face some challenges. Only 16% said they were comfortable accessing healthcare in the last 6 months. Of those with a family doctor, 31% found it difficult or very difficult to book an appointment for early detection or cancer screening. In stark contrast, 76% of those without a family doctor reported difficulty accessing the same service within the last 6 months. Similarly, 30% of those with a doctor reported difficulty accessing non-emergency treatment in the last 6 months, compared to 74% of those without a family doctor. Canadian healthcare is in a troubling situation and in dire straits, Geoff. When we look at the opinion polls, that reflects that people are not having a good experience, an efficient experience. But aside just from the polls, what are some objective statistics or data points that demonstrate the state of our healthcare system?
Well, Cosmin, for starters, a secondstreet.org study from FOI requests across provinces showed that at least 23,746 patients died on wait lists for surgeries and diagnostic scans in the 2024-2025 fiscal year alone. That's up 3% from the previous year in regions with comparable data. And it brings the total since 2018 to over 100,000 deaths while waiting for care. Extrapolating for gaps in reporting, like full data from Alberta, the real number could be closer to 50,000 for last year. Wait times are brutal too. In July 2024, an Ontario doctor reported referring a patient to an ENT specialist only to get slapped with a 3-year wait, which is par for the course in a system where 6.5 million Canadians, about 1 in 5, don't have a family doctor. Retention's another killer. A leaky bucket 2025 report from the Institution for Canadian Citizenship found that 36% of immigrant healthcare workers leave Canada within 5 years of arriving, often due to endless red tape, credentialing hurdles that trap over 13,000 internationally trained physicians in limbo, unable to practice despite shortages of 23,000 GPs and 60,000 nurses. Health groups like the Royal College of Physicians and the College of Family Physicians have testified that Ottawa never consulted them on how ramping up immigration, 395,000 permanent residents this year alone, slams the system without the capacity to integrate them. And don't get me started on drug shortages. Over 1,800 different types of medicine are in short supply, forcing folks like a Crohn's patient in Oshawa to drive 300 kilometers, call 20 pharmacies a day, and cross into New York eventually for life-saving medicine. Chemo patients are jetting abroad too, and the uptick in border runs has doubled in recent years. It's a total mess. Preventable deaths, brain drain, and folks rationing time and cash just to stay alive.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.